Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hi there, I'm Mo Chatra, and welcome to another episode of Money Talks. And I'm welcoming back a special guest that I had on Money Talks several years ago, and he's joining me to cover a number of very, very interesting subjects. This is coming off of a conversation that this guest had with the CEO of Liverpool Football Club, Billy Hogan. It's the sports writer for FC Business and also the Mail. It is Alex Miller. How are you doing, Alex?
Hi there, nice to be back. Yeah, I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, really good, really good. Trying my best not to melt away in this very, very hot weather that we're enjoying here in England. But yeah, just about surviving. I'm sure you are as well.
Just about.
Right. So as I say, quite a number of interesting topics to cover coming off of the back of your recent conversation with the CEO of Liverpool Football Club, Billy Hogan. And I'd like to start, if I may, with the recently announced extension to the sponsorship deal that Liverpool has with Standard Chartered. It's a relationship that commenced way back in 2010 under the previous ownership of Ixon Gillette, and has been extended and will continue for another 4 years. And it is reported to be a deal that will be at least 50 million a year for Liverpool Football Club's coffers, and that's an increase of 10 million on the basic deal that was struck back in 2018. Now, Alex, it's interesting this because just about 2 to 3 months ago, when there was a lot of reporting about this story, there were noises coming out in certain quarters that Liverpool were looking at potentially doing a deal, getting up to about 70 to 80 million pounds per annum, and yet the deal is for 50 million pounds plus bonuses linked to achievements. So obviously, if Liverpool were to win the Premier League or the Champions League, then Standard Chartered would pay out more. But nonetheless, not quite at the levels of the figures that had been reported. So is that perhaps because those reports were wide of the mark and Liverpool were not really expecting to secure a front of shirt sponsorship deal for 70 to 80 million? Or is it that the offers were there on the table, but they decided to stick with what they know and extend their current deal with Standard Chartered?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, because, as you say, reports had been out a good few months before confirmation of the new deal was put out. The club, without question, had gone out to market to test the waters. Had gone out with a figure in their head of what they ideally wanted. They went out and tested the market. They found pretty quickly that, as you would expect with a club in the shape Liverpool are in, that there was a lot of interest. Of course, money always talks. And they were always going to get an uplift. There was no question about that. I think some of the figures that were put out there were literally set to test the market. I wouldn't say they were sort of necessarily wide of the mark. I think that some of it served as a bit of a, sort of finger in the air to see what would come back. I did hear quite strong rumours, and indeed there had been reports of the club talking to crypto companies. Now, I've heard conflicting reports around that, because the club are absolutely adamant that they were never close to a deal with a crypto sponsor for the front of shirt, and yet reports had it out there that they were They were in some very serious talks. Again, I think it was just a case of testing the market. I think the thing to remember always was that Standard Chartered had they always had first dibs, if you like, on renegotiating the deal. They were always going to have that, and I think in the end it was a question of if Standard Chartered were happy to agree to the kind of uplift the club were wanting, that deal was always going to get done. So I think it's interesting to note that Standard Chartered were always, favourites to continue, and they simply had to put money on the table that the club were looking for to sort of reflect their sort of progress on the pitch.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the wider context, it's still a very, very strong deal. Certainly one of the top shirt sponsorship deals in world football, and the fact that there is that stability there, that long-term relationship, I think also counted for something. And it's still ultimately a strong deal to be struck. And again, just in terms of that wider context, if you look at Manchester United, for example, their previous deal with Chevrolet was paying out up to £64 million a year, and yet their deal with TeamViewer was secured for clearly less than that. And that deal as well with TeamViewer, which is £47 million a year, is only a year into a 4-year agreement, and yet I think it was just a couple of weeks ago that TeamViewer put out a statement to confirm that they would not extend that deal, even though it has got a further 3 years to run. Against that kind of wider context, I think overall it is still a strong deal, and should Liverpool secure further major silverware, this season and the coming seasons, and clearly they can expect to be generating anywhere from 55 to maybe even £60 million at the top end from that deal with Standard Chartered. So overall, I think they'll be pleased with the commercial team at the club with the deal that they've struck there.
Well, I agree. I agree. Sorry, Mark. I agree with you, and we mustn't forget that, as you quite rightly point out, that deal with Standard Chartered effectively puts Liverpool alongside Manchester City as the most lucrative deal of its type in the Premier League, just a few million ahead of United. But I think we ought to just sort of marry off any disappointment, if that is the right way to put it, with the fact that we ought to just sort of remember that it is the most lucrative deal of its kind in the Premier League, and so that's no mean feat. It should be what Liverpool are doing with the way they're sort of going about their business, on the pitch, the success they're having, etc. We know the size of the club, and it should be what they're doing. But they are doing it. They have sort of gone there, haven't they, and sort of eked out a good deal. And I think you're right. I think the deal, that my understanding is it could get 55 to 60 with certain success bonus payments put in there. So yeah, I think you've got to be very happy with that, really.
Yeah. Now, on the subject of sponsorship deals featured on Club Shirt, the sleeve sponsorship is currently with Expedia, and that's a deal that pays out approximately, my understanding is about £9 million a year, which is an improvement on the previous deal, which was with Western Union, which had been paying out approximately £7 million a year. And I think it was Victor. I think they were the first sleeve sponsor several seasons ago, and that was paying out that £5 million a year. That said, there are other clubs in the league that do generate more from their sleeve sponsorship. Manchester United, most notably. So again, with this deal having less than a season to run, the club's attentions must clearly be turning to that. And what is the club's mood in terms of securing an equally as impressive deal for that part of the shirt as compared to the front of shirt deal that they recently secured with Standard Chartered?
Yeah, so it's a good question because, one thing, if we take a step back, what we do know about Liverpool is that they tend, when they find a partner that works well, they do tend to have very long-term relationships. So whether that's Crown Paints, whether that's Carlsberg, whether that's now Standard Chartered, when they find a partner that works really well, you tend to find that those partners hang around, and I think that's really important to the club. I think these relationships are really important to the club. So I think what we do know around the sleeve deal with Expedia is we do know that they're already in talks about striking an improved deal. Again, Expedia have first rights on extending before Liverpool are able to go out to the market. Now, my feeling is that, in fact, not my feeling, but from what I understand from Billy Hogan and others, is that partnership is working really well. They in terms of, we hear a lot about similarities and sort of cultural similarities and all this kind of thing, but I think it's about partnerships, and the partnership seems to be working really well. And my understanding is that the club are not that far away, probably around Christmas time, if not before, to announce an extension to that deal. That would be my prediction, and I would say to you, they're going to, without question, as with the Standard Chartered deal, they're going to get improved terms. The question will be whether they can get quite up to sort of 20 million a year. It wouldn't surprise me, and if they got somewhere, moved it from say 9 to 15, with some heavy incentives in there as well. Yes. Because I really think, for the sake of a couple of million, and I don't say it flippantly, but I really believe it, that I just think they place such a value on the brand of the company, the type of company that's on the shirt, and the working relationship they have. And I think they place an awful lot of value in that. So I think they would even, whisper it quietly, I think they'd even probably forego a couple of million a year if it was to work with the partner they really want to continue with.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's you say something that seems a lot of value in. It's not just about looking to secure deals with those that offer the most amount of money. There has to be a certain synergy there, beyond just who offers the most. So, no, again, that is to be admired in terms of the way that the club operates. That even with partners, they do look for those with certain shared values, and that again clearly is important to Liverpool. So again, that is certainly promising that the club is working on that deal, and hopefully we'll have something announced this side of Christmas. Now, on sticking with income generation activities, one area that the club arguably has had less success in is the kind of broader category of crypto, and their first kind of foray into that was in the whole world of NFTs, and they aim to generate a really significant sum. I think from memory it was about £8 to £9 million from sale of NFTs, and yet they came nowhere near that. I think it generated about £1 million, or just slightly above that. Now, is this something that the club perhaps is revisiting in terms of its strategy around this, and also around associated matters such as blockchain? What's the kind of club's kind of direction of travel, do you think, around that front?
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that we know they've had a foray into it, and it perhaps from a financial point of view didn't get where they wanted it to be. I think there was perhaps some lessons learned in terms of how they went about it, the language around it, the concept, etc. But I think when you bear in mind that Manchester United have done a crypto deal worth 24 million a year, that's huge money, and I think Liverpool, without question, are looking at it, will continue to look at it. I think they'll look and try and learn from mistakes they've made before. but I think they admit quite openly that it's an area that they're absolutely going to continue to explore, to look at, see how they can roll out concepts and ideas that will work well, which will serve the purposes of the club, and also, bring around a property, if you like, that the fans want to get involved with. So, the idea of a crypto sponsor, I don't think is unrealistic. Perhaps sooner rather than later. As for the the release again of NFTs, I think lessons have been learned, and I think that I think other offers and other situations will come out in the future. I don't think the club put it another way, I don't think the club have been scared off from it. I think they will literally sort of take stock, look at what's happened, and sort of look to learn from that and come back again. I mean, they'll talk about how they managed from that NFT launch to raise, I think it was something like 250, perhaps more, 300,000 for the foundation. So far from all doom and gloom around it, even if it didn't have the success that they perhaps wanted when they first looked at it. But it's not going away, is it? Crypto, it's and if it's a revenue source that the club can add to its another string to its bow, then they're going to continue to look at it, and you can understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly for Manchester United, current climate secure deal of 24 million a year for a crypto partner will certainly be something Liverpool can't ignore. So I think there must be actively explore opportunities exist on that front. But at the same time, partnering with somebody that they feel is right will be important. I mean, we know that, for example, Manchester City have in the last 12 months partnered with crypto companies that upon a bit of due diligence carried out by the likes of Tariq Panja and others, seems to suggest that maybe those companies were not quite what they tout themselves to be. So I think Liverpool will be very careful about selecting the right kind of partner to avoid any kind of adverse publicity. And I'd be certainly confident that if they do secure a crypto sponsorship deal of some sort, that they will certainly put the time and effort into making sure the operation and the partner itself is legitimate and can work well with them. Now, changing subject to Anfield. Now, this is obviously the home of Liverpool and has been since its inception in 1892, and one of the first big decisions that the ownership group, FSG, had to make back in 2010 when they took over the club was whether to up sticks and move to a brand new stadium or to remain at Anfield. And clearly they opted for the latter, and that was something that had worked well for them with their Boston Red Sox. They stayed at Fenway Park and decided to redevelop that historic stadium, and that worked well for them there. Now, we are now into phase 2 of Anfield's expansion, following the completion of the main stand expansion back in 2016-17. Anfield Road End, the expansion of that commenced several months ago, and it is motoring along extremely well. The club has intentions to complete the bulk of the work, certainly in order to increase the capacity in time for the start of the 2023-24 season, which is approximately a year away from now. So what's the club's view about their approach to the stands expansion, especially in light of the fact that they are incorporating further hospitality within that? And are they very optimistic about what that expansion can bring to the club, not only in terms of revenue, but kind of further benefits as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my understanding is that the expanded Anfield Road end is going to be worth in the region of around another 10 million a year to match day revenues. So when you think it's costing 80 million, that's a return in 8 years. That's the kind of level of return on investment that FSG like, and that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And just to have more fans in the stadium, of course, is brilliant. The atmosphere will go up, more fans in. What's not to like? I think where they're also going to see further benefits, of course, is non-match day events, whether that's boxing, whether that's rugby, whether that's concerts, etc., etc. You're just going to be able to get more bums on seats, figuratively speaking, when with the expansion. So it's a win-win, isn't it? And of course, we all know that the model of the club is spend what you generate. So the more the club can generate, the more we can spend. So I think that's good news all round. And I think everything's done in a very cool, calm, and calculated way. And I think again, talking to people around the construction, my understanding is nothing's impossible, nothing's ruled in, nothing's ruled out. I think in an ideal world, would the club like to do the Sir Kenny Dalglish and the Kop as well? I think the answer to that is of course they would. But everything will have to be taken on its merits. And who knows? We do know obviously that they're extremely hemmed in on those two sides. So an awful lot of hurdles and an awful lot of thought to go into those. But I wouldn't necessarily rule out further work on the stadium after the new Anfield Road end. Of course, it just depends on what they're able to do in terms of working with the council and the local area around the ground. So it wouldn't surprise me if something were to be done in the sort of next sort of midterm, sort of 5-6 years. It wouldn't surprise me. But likewise, a modernisation of what's already there, an improvement on what's already there in those other two stands. That's the low bar, if you like. A kind of an update and a modification of those two areas. I think that's the very least that we can expect to see. But the club, as we know, the owners are very careful not to promise anything. They like to go steady. So I just wouldn't be expecting any announcements in the foreseeable future at all. And of course, it's been well documented. We know that the problems with transport and getting in and out of the ground, that's an issue when the stadium gets over a certain size. We also know obviously people's houses are back onto the Sir Kenny Dalglish stand, so there's issues around that. So there's no easy solution, but I think as we've seen with the owners, they'll work through it, and don't be surprised to see sort of further announcements once this new stand is complete and up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd certainly not be surprised if certainly after the expansion of the Anfield Road end been completed and that's been and gone, or at least feasibility study to be undertaken to look into the viability of expanding either of the two remaining stands. I think that's certainly a possibility. And with the Kop, clearly it's the most famous of the four stands at Anfield. But it will certainly be looking comparatively small once Anfield Road end is completed, and it will be certainly in the shadow of the main stand, which is a gargantuan stand in its own right. And so I think of the two stands, that's probably the least or the less complex one to expand, purely because the property issues that we know delayed the main stand expansion for many years probably wouldn't be as much of a factor with expanding the Kop as would be the case with Sir Kenny Dalglish stand. So that's certainly one to keep an eye on. And another interesting point as well is that as part of expanding the Anfield Road end, the club did commission a transport study as well. And what the transport study found is that match day spectators' habits in terms of getting to games has changed over the years. And based on that latest assessment, they were of the view that it's potentially viable to accommodate as many as 70,000 on a match day without bringing the road infrastructure around the ground to a complete and utter halt, which is a variation to when they commissioned a similar study when they looked into potentially putting a new stadium up in Stanley Park. And at that time, figure of about 61,000 was thought to be the absolute maximum number of spectators that could be accommodated within the road infrastructure around the ground. So changing habits in terms of how fans get to the game would seem to suggest, based on that study, that potentially there is scope for further expansion. But again, I don't think we'll hear anything much about that from the club for good, 15 to 18 months, certainly after the phase 2 of Anfield expansion is complete.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say. I think that's right, and I think we can throw into the mix also that construction technology is moving on at a sort of fair rate of knots too, and so things that weren't possible 10, 20 years ago are now doable. So for example, when Chelsea were looking at that sort of Roman Abramovich new stadium, they were looking to build over a railway line at the back of on one side. Manchester United, again, if they ever get around to expanding Old Trafford, they're looking at expanding over the railway. And these are situations that weren't possible 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I think one of the things to keep in your sort of back pocket, if you like, is to keep an eye on whether, dovetailing back into what you were saying about the COP, whether there's a way in which technology around building over railways, building over roads can be done in a way that's sensitive and wouldn't mean you've got to kind of reroute main roads and all that kind of thing. I think maybe the people looking around at it may be looking at that as a possibility. I mean, I'd be amazed if they're not looking at that. So that's something to just sort of hold on to in your back pocket, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, quite right about that. Now, just sticking with the subject of the stadium, one of the things that was mentioned prior to commencement of the works to expand the main stand back in, which I think commenced around 2014, 15, was the subject of naming rights. And it was suggested by the club's hierarchy at that time that some of the costs of expanding that stand could be met by potential sponsorship deal linked to naming of the stand. Now, clearly that didn't materialise, and everything went quiet on that front for several years until pretty recently, when in another interview that Billy Hogan recently conducted, he just happened to mention naming rights again. So I just wondered if you had heard anything about this, and where do you think that is viable? And again, in terms of wider context, we know that since Tottenham Hotspur moved into their magnificent new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, even prior to that, they had also been mooting the possibility of naming that stadium, and clearly a naming rights deal for that stadium has yet to materialise. So it's clearly very difficult to secure such deals, certainly in this country. I mean, in America it seems to be pretty common. Here it seems to be, for whatever reason, a bit more difficult, and perhaps even more so for a stand. But certainly in terms of either the main stand or the Anfield Road end, have you heard anything about this in terms of naming rights?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I like you. I was slightly gobsmacked when I saw that, because my understanding of the market is the market's pretty flat. So you look at Tottenham. You mentioned Tottenham. You mentioned West Ham. Neither club have been able to secure a sponsorship deal on what were brand new stadiums, and I think probably the ship has sailed on both of those now. They're probably unlikely to ever get there now because the stadium's already too far down the road in terms of age, and it's become, it's sort of known as what they're known as. And I mean, my understanding is, the market's pretty flat. What we do know is that the club were definitely in the market for a stand sponsor when Anfield Road End went up. There were conversations with interested parties, but they couldn't agree a price. So it didn't happen. Of course, sponsoring a stand is different from sponsoring a stadium in the sense that you're more like it's going to be a smaller deal, probably more likely to be a local company, certainly a national company, but probably a regional company. It's got a different sort of reach, if you like, and a different feel. So I just think the interested parties weren't able to get one over the line. My understanding of the market is it's still pretty much the same, and in terms of, as I say, being flat. And again, I think when Liverpool went out looking for a naming partner originally, it was always a kind of would be nice to have, but was never a sort of was never like we have to do this. I think it was always seen as a nice to have rather than an essential. And my feeling around this one is it's the same in the sense that it's not high priority for the club. I mean, Standard Chartered and Expedia deals, things like that. That's key. That's essential. And my understanding of this one is that again, it's going to be in the category of nice to have. But if something happens, great. If it doesn't happen, I don't think they're really expecting it, and it would just be a bonus, really. So for me, I would be surprised if they did get a deal. But who knows? It's possible, of course. I would put that in the sort of in the sort of more unlikely to happen category, if you like.
Yeah, likewise. I think not certainly. We're seeing very little appetite, as you say, for attaching brands to stadiums. Never mind for stands, individual stands. So I would be very surprised if that were to come to fruition. But watch this space. Now.
Yeah. So I think again what you'll find a little bit like with the Standard Chartered when we started seeing figures floating around in the press, I think you find what can sometimes happen is the club starts to conduct a kind of fishing exercise or a kind of, like I say, a finger in the air to sort of see how the wind's blowing. It's a kind of almost an exercise to sort of flush anyone out who's interested, or to sort of let it be known that talks are possible. So I think it's an exercise in, again, seeing what interest is out there, and I don't suppose for 1 minute there's a lack of interest, but I think it's just a case of, can a potential partner meet the value that the club would put on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just sticking with sponsorship, just broadening it across Premier League clubs. Now, we're coming off of the worst of COVID, or at least I hope we are, which has certainly affected football clubs over the last couple of years. And we know that Liverpool have lost out on approximately £100 million in revenue. Other clubs have lost even more. And some clubs have suffered significantly further afield, such as Barcelona, due to COVID. But in light of all of that, what are you finding in terms of companies out there and their appetite to sponsor football clubs and for them to be associated with football clubs? Are you seeing a decline in interest, or are you finding the opposite, that in fact there's healthy interest still, despite the tough times that individuals and corporations have been through over the last 2.5 years?
Yeah, I recently compiled a league table of total sponsorships for Premier League clubs in terms of front of shirt and sleeve, sort of totted it all together. And I do this on an annual basis. And recently found that despite the fact Nottingham Forest has still yet to do any deals front of shirt or sleeve, that the value, the combined total, if you like, is still rising. So to me, there's still upward movement in the market. There's still interest. I think the you can split the Premier League really into sort of two categories. You've got the sort of top 6 or 7, where interest is always there, isn't it? And the prices are huge. Whether we're talking about 50 million Standard Chartered's next deal on the front of shirt, or will Expedia get to 15 plus on the sleeve? Will they match Man United and Chelsea are getting 20 million on the sleeve? I mean, those figures are astronomical, and the interest is always going to be there from multinational companies, and so the demand there is kind of you can sort of you can take that slightly for granted. I think then you've got the kind of the clubs outside of that. So you're talking your sort of your Leicesters, your Evertons, etc. And I'm seeing that prices at that level are also sneaking up, so that the interest and the demand is still there. And then even at the sort of, shall we put it, at the kind of the sort of smaller end of that group, you sort of, shall we say, your sort of Brentfords, Fulhams, Bournemouths, again prices are sneaking up. Maybe 3.5, 4 million for a front of shirt deal, million on the sleeve. That's crept up, that's creeping up, 500,000 or a million a year. So those deals are sort of inching it up again. So as an overall picture, the sort of mass appeal of the Premier League is well talked and well understood. So I think that's always going to be attractive. I think obviously, what you tend to see, if you like, at the sort of lower end of I say lower with all due respect, at the end of the Premier League, is that, clubs do tend to veer towards betting companies. They will veer towards crypto, and those are companies that the bigger clubs tend to keep away from, certainly front of shirt. And those companies are willing to throw money at clubs. So, as an overall picture, as we've seen with Liverpool's recent deal, values are still climbing, and I think that's, as a rule of thumb, that's the case across the Premier League, just at different incremental levels.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that certainly when clubs look at what has traditionally been their largest source of revenue, that has been the domestic TV rights deals. And that revenue stream is flatlined, albeit the overseas rights have continued to show healthy growth. It puts an even greater emphasis on trying to optimize commercial revenues, does it not? And I think certainly clubs are looking increasingly for opportunities to generate funds through commercial activities.
The total this year I found, and as I was saying, Nottingham Forest still hadn't, at the time of writing, hadn't announced any deals. So the Premier League off front of shirt and sleeve was coming in at around 462.5 million. So pushing towards the 500 million mark. So that's up on, that's up another 20 million on just last year, and that's without Forest, as I say, without Forest having a deal. So you could say put another 10 on that amount. So as a combined figure, that's about 500 million, and like I say, sort of showing no sign of decreasing. I would suggest that, as you say, coming out of COVID and fans back in the stadium, and fingers crossed that remains the case, then the interest is there and the values will continue to climb. I think the only thing I can see around the corner that might put a dent in that is whether or not we ever do get a kind of some sort of blanket ban on gambling sponsorships on the shirts.
Yep.
Obviously, it's sort of that issue blows hot and cold, doesn't it? But I don't think that issue's gone away for sure. And we obviously look to see over the next few years whether gambling is the betting companies are allowed to continue with those sort of deals, because I feel they are sort of helping to keep the deal values up, if you like, keeping those values up and continuing to rise and climb.
Yeah, certainly for a number of the smaller teams that can hover towards the bottom end, even the middle section of the Premier League. Those types of deals and those types of companies are very important. So, if that supply income is cut off due to legislation, that will be a blow for some clubs. But a club like Liverpool, they potentially will be able to withstand that kind of development. Whereas for a club like Stoke, albeit Stoke is a championship club, that could have a very detrimental effect on them. So again, it's something to keep an eye out for. Right now, just in closing, just wanted to touch upon transfer market, and clearly we are coming towards the tail end of the summer transfer window, and towards the back end of last season, I tweeted out an estimate for Liverpool in terms of revenue, which was I estimated that the revenue for the club was going to be £580 million or more, given that they got all the way to the Champions League final again. They came second in the Premier League, and on top of that, had very strong sales through year 2 of the Nike deal, and continue to work on improving commercial revenue. So I estimated 580 million, and that would be comfortably record levels of turnover for the club. Their previous high mark when it comes to turnover was in 18-19, just before the pandemic, where they hit 533 million. And I'm raising this because there are a lot of fans on social media that have this misconception that the club is short of funds. There's a lack of funds, and based on my very simple analysis of what the club is like to have generated, albeit that won't be confirmed until the accounts are published in the new calendar year of 2023. But nonetheless, it's huge amounts of revenue, and for that reason, I have argued that if there is a lack of activity in terms of incomings, it's certainly not down to a lack of funds, and that the money is there. If the right player, the right signing is there to be had, and for that deal to be made. So, what is your view about that kind of perception or misconception, I should say, on social media, and also your understanding of the club's levels of revenue and their financial state as well?
Yeah, I like you. I'd say your 580 million is going to be pretty close. I think you're right. The last season will produce record revenues, and without question, the money's there. I can understand fans who want to see the money splashed. But I think the club. I think we have to just if we don't trust the way the club go about their business by now, when are we ever going to? They sort of show it time and time again. I think what's forgotten is obviously we made the we made some signings we made a signing Luis Diaz in January, which I think was earmarked as a summer move. So I think that one gets sort of slightly forgotten. But obviously when we heard about Tottenham going in for him, that sort of brought forward our plans for him. So I think certainly the money is there. I think when the right player comes along, they will make their moves. It's been slightly exaggerated a bit, hasn't it? Because we've already seen a few injuries in midfield. So I think a midfielder is what most fans would like. And I agree with you. Then my understanding is that for the right player, the money is there. It's not that the money isn't there. It's but they're not gonna settle for a panic buy. They're not going to buy someone that doesn't fit into their long-term thinking. So, we see as we speak, Thiago's out for 4 to 6 weeks, which is a huge blow, and not for the first time either. But the club are not going to panic, and the club are not going to go make a signing just to cover an injury for 4 or 6 weeks. They're going to give an opportunities to other players. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense that my understanding is very much that the money's there for the right signing. The obvious one to mention is Jude Bellingham. I think that he's someone that's very much of interest to the club. No secret to share that. And my feeling is if the club could have got him or can still get him in this transfer window, they will. If they can get him even in a deal a bit like Keita, where they make the signing and he follows, 6 months or 12 months later, they would settle on that as well. So I think things are going on behind the scenes, and I think Jude Bellingham is an example of the kind of signing they're looking at and are hugely interested in. And I think the money is there for that one. So it's sort of it's an issue, isn't it, in the sense that we want the signing now, but some things are not possible. So they'll kind of work for the long term good of the club rather than get sort of pushed into making short term decisions that are not what they really want to go for. I mean, you remember when we obviously missed out on Van Dijk, and everyone was sort of pushing for us to sign another centre back, but the club refused to panic and be pushed into making a signing they didn't really want. And of course, long term, look how that one's turned out. So I think we just have to have a little bit of patience, but of course it's not what we want, is it? Either as fans, we don't have patience. We kind of want it all now. But when you look at the season we just had, and 2 games away from what would have been a truly remarkable season, they're not in bad shape, are they? Really?
No, absolutely not. And you don't have to look far into the past. Go back to summer 2019. Summer 2018 even, when we finished runners up in the Champions League. 2019 even. Summer 2019, we won the Champions League. We thought fantastic. Clearly we missed out on the Premier League, but I think it was a point that season. Manchester City, we finished on about 97. I think they secured 98, if memory serves me correctly. And we were all hoping and expecting to make several big signings to take us further forward and kick on and eventually win the Premier League. And instead, our marquee signing for that summer, depending on how you look at it, was either Sepp Vandenberg or Adrian. Harvey Elliott also came in that window as well. So by the end of that window, many of us were despondent, thinking, "Oh, what is the club doing? We need to be kicking on here." And what did we know? The club instead turned into an absolute machine going into the subsequent season of 1920, and won the Premier League by canter. And had it not been for nursing hangovers for the last several weeks of that season, would have exceeded 100 points. And that was a really remarkable team that season, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think we have to have faith. They know what they're doing. They've proven it year after year after year. And yeah, I think, like I say, with Bellingham, there's no question that they would like him in now. No question at all. So, I think it's one to keep an eye on, one to watch. And like I say, when we as fans look at transfers, we get rather impatient. But yeah, like I say, I think the fans can at least be confident, in the fact that, should the right player become available, we can move. We've got the money; it's there. So I don't think there's any problems around that. And so it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but when you look at Manchester United fans, it's obviously a joy to see how unhappy a lot of them are at the start of this season. They've lost already at home, haven't they? And that they're getting sort of upset about lack of players coming in, but you look at actually what they've spent in the last 5 or 6 years. It's not like they haven't been spending money, but Man United are just an example of showing you that if you spend the money, incorrectly, it's as big a problem as not spending at all, isn't it? So, I think it's just a case of have some faith in the way the club's being run, and hopefully we get Bellingham sooner rather than later.
Yeah, totally. It's certainly a fantastic addition to that midfield. As you say, if the player isn't available until next summer, then clearly the club has already demonstrated in the past that it would rather wait for that right signing than to bring in a stopgap. So, all being well, the club could still surprise us and pull that one out with Bellingham coming in this summer, though it does at this point look unlikely. But even if it doesn't transpire for this summer, I personally have a lot of confidence that we can certainly get a deal done, which will ensure that arguably the most promising young English midfielder of his generation will be playing in the red of Liverpool from summer 23. So that is certainly a scenario that is very much to look forward to. But that's been absolutely fantastic. Some really insightful stuff there, Alex. Really do appreciate you joining us and sharing your thoughts, and also some information that you've gleaned from your conversation with Billy Hogan and others at Liverpool Football Club. So that is really, really appreciated, as I say. So, in closing, where can people find your work, and also where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, thanks. You can often find my work on FC Business magazine or Mail on Sunday or Sunday Mirror. I'm a freelance, so I work across different titles. But you can find my some of my thoughts and stories. I often post up on Twitter. So I'm at AlexMiller73. So you'll find me there. And it's been an absolute joy to join you today, and pleased to have been invited back, and hopefully I'll be back again soon.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it again. So that was Alex Miller, and we certainly covered a vast array of different subjects on the sponsorship front. I hope to be back after the end of the transfer window. I should return in September. Being well, I'll be covering another aspect of finance for you great listeners. But until next time, up the Reds.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index, and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.